Hey, welcome to 12-Tone. When we talk about scales, it's usually in groups like the modes. The specifics aren't really that important, it's more about the structures that relate them. But sometimes a scale comes along that's so unique with so many interesting features that we really need to stop and look at it all on its own. Today, I'd like to do a deep dive on one of the most beautifully structured scales out there, the Octatonic Scale. It's come up a couple times before, but we've never really put it under a microscope, and trust me, there's a lot to see. Let's start with what it is. The word octatonic means 8 notes, but we usually mean something a little more specific. The official octatonic scale starts on a note, then goes up a whole step, then a half step, then it keeps alternating between those until it gets all the way up to the octave and starts again. This brings us to our first point. The repeating pattern makes it a symmetrical scale with all of the interesting properties associated with those. We've talked about these before, but to quickly recap, the most important thing is that they don't like to move very much. If they go too far, they just start repeating themselves. In fact, there's only 3 actually different versions of this scale. This one, and this one. It's inescapable. If you try to start anywhere else, you'll still wind up with one of these sets of notes, just in a different order. Which brings us to our second point, modes. A mode is a scale that shares all the same pitches with another scale, but with a different starting note, which gives it a different shape. With normal scales, this can get you all sorts of different sounds, varying from incredibly bright to dark and brooding. Most scales have a unique mode for every single scale degree, but the octatonic scale only has 2. This one, which we already saw, and this one, which is the same pattern, but it starts with a half step instead. Again, if you try to start somewhere else, you're not going to get a new shape, you'll just get one of these two, but with a different root. But that's just its construction. Let's talk about harmony. Let's look at the chords you can make from it. The first thing that stands out is that it's full of diminished chords. You can pick any starting note you want and build a diminished triad or 7th chord on top of it. They're everywhere. We can even think of the whole scale as 2 separate diminished 7th chords taped together, and it's one of the few chord scales that actually works over such a dissonant sound. Given all that, it's probably not surprising that jazz musicians have nicknamed it the diminished scale. It just fits. But it's not just diminished, there's all sorts of chords hiding in here. If you look carefully, you can find 4 different minor triads, and perhaps more surprisingly, 4 different major ones. This lets you build some really out there harmonies connecting incredibly disparate chords into a coherent framework. For instance, this progression is all in the same key. Weird, right? And if we move on from triads to 7th chords, we can find even more. The octatonic scale is full of minor 7s, minor 7 flat 5s, and dominant 7s. And that last one, it turns out, is important because dominant scales, as we've mentioned before, are special. Dominant chords are the engine behind modern functional harmony. They're what keeps music moving. It's all about tension and release, and dominant chords provide that tension. Dominant scales, then, give us different ways to accent it, and it's important to have lots of different options. In fact, it's so important that the second mode, where you can build a dominant chord from the root, is often called dominant diminished. Plus, it's a pretty cool name. And we're still not done. There's lots more to say about this scale. For instance, it contains 4 instances of every single interval. Seriously, every single one. It's insane. We can also break it into larger chunks. For instance, if we look at it again, these 4 notes and these 4 notes are the beginnings of 2 different minor scales. This lets us do something called bitonality, where we play in 2 different keys at the same time. This approach was used by composers like Bela Bartok and Igor Stravinsky, and it's pretty intense. If you want to know more about it, we've covered some techniques before. Honestly though, this still isn't even everything that's interesting about the octatonic scale. I'm not sure I could make an exhaustive list if I tried, and that's sort of the point. It's easy to get swept up in new ideas, new constructs, and new ways of organizing sound, but sometimes it's worth taking a good long look at something you already know. You might be surprised what you find. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you want to help make these videos possible, please consider supporting 12-Tone on Patreon. You can also join our mailing list for scans of all our episodes. Like, share, comment, subscribe, and keep on rockin'.